Hello, everybody. Welcome to our panel chat. I'm Patrick Grant. I am the designer and I guess the business leader of a brand called Community Clothing and a bunch of other things. Community Clothing you can buy today in Selfridges as part of Project Earth. Get that little commercial plug in there early. I have four fantastic panelists with me today. I am going to let them introduce themselves very quickly, and then we're going to get on to the nitty-gritty of our conversation. Bay.
Hi, my name is Bay Garnett and I am a fashion stylist, and I'm also senior fashion advisor at Oxfam. Few other things, but I think the Oxfam thing is probably most relevant to what we're talking about this evening.
Caroline.
Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you. I'm Caroline Issa, and I am the CEO and the fashion director of Pank magazine here in London and a consultant for some brands as well.
Dia.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dio Kurazawa. I'm the co-founder of a company called the Bear Scouts, and I'm also an earthling and lover of the planet.
And finally, Arizona.
Hello, everyone. I'm Arizona Muse. I am a model who is fascinated and passionate about the earth. And so that led me to learn as much as I can about sustainability, about climate change, about what we as a fashion industry can do to have a positive impact on the earth and the humans who live on the earth. I truly enjoy reading scientific reports and am obsessed by materials.
Well, I studied materials at university. I have a degree in material science and engineering. And for 3 years, I hated reading about materials. No, I didn't. I loved it. It was fascinating. But I think it's interesting now that we're all becoming experts in materials and material science. So finally, 25 years later, my degree is becoming relevant. Bay, I want to start with you because when I got into fashion, which was in the 1980s, fashion was a very small thing. Fashion was something that appeared on the pages of a small number of magazines once a month, and clothes appeared in stores twice a year. And we had to wait for our fashion. We kind of looked forward to it every month. And personally, what I did was I read the pages of Vogue and Elle and so on, and then I went to the charity shops of Edinburgh and I scoured the rails for days and days until I found almost exactly the right thing that looked like the thing in the photograph, and then I wore that for 6 months, and then I did the same thing again. So I think it's very interesting that for a long time, secondhand, and it's interesting also that we're now talking about it as secondhand again rather than vintage, and maybe that's deliberate, maybe not, but it was, for a long time, it was seen very much as, it was sort of, there was a stigma, a negative stigma attached to wearing secondhand clothes for a very long time. And I think in the last 4 or 5 years, I've seen a very dramatic shift. And you were doing something fascinating with Oxfam and Selfridges. And they have done something that is quite extraordinary, Selfridges, I mean by that. And they have put secondhand clothing in the most prestigious fashion department store in the world. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I would love to. Yes, I suppose you said earlier about secondhand being replacing this idea of vintage. I think vintage is quite a specialist term in a way. It's quite a niche term. It's quite a fashion term. And I like to think that the reason why we're using the term secondhand is because it's becoming much wider and much more sort of for everybody. In a sense, it's in an intersection of replacing fast fashion and high fashion, or, lots of different ways that we can buy clothes. I think secondhand's right on that cusp of really doing that in a really, really big way. The shop in Selfridges is this idea of when you go into a charity shop, just like you were saying in the 80s, when you would know exactly what you wanted to find and you'd go and find it, you're looking at that item and you're using your imagination and you're shifting context that you were when you're inspired by finding it, or that picture that made you want to find it. And I suppose for me, charity shops have always offered this thing of you find something and then you move it outside of that space, put it in your own space, in your imagination, in the way that you style yourself in. It's such an independent way to shop. And so the idea for the Oxfam Selfridges shop is, okay, so it's doing that with a shop and doing what you do with the clothing in a charity shop, but doing it as a shop. So this idea of sort of shifting contexts, of putting, okay, so let's put an Oxfam charity shop with Oxfam price in the context and in the actual environment of Gucci and Miu Miu and Prada. And it's been very interesting and really fun. So calm down. Yeah. It's been, and Selfridges have been absolutely amazing in their support and encouragement. And all the money goes to Oxfam. So it's completely charitable.
Now, have you selected the pieces? Have you selected fashion labels, or have you selected really interesting pieces of clothing?
Oh, like a real mix. So I think that's a good question, actually, because it is about the edit. It is about the edit. So what's kind of really fun about it is that you've got Oxfam prices. So the average price of something is £35, but the edit's really good. So you've got Hardy Amis dresses from the 60s that look like Gucci. You've got a flying jacket that looks like Balenciaga. You've got these different clothes that look like the things that maybe their neighbors sell, but they're all at the Oxfam prices. And so I think that was always really important to us, is that what wouldn't happen was that the prices would hike up with their context, with this new context, which is what so happens. You pay for the bells and whistles, you pay for the velvet, you pay for the marble, you pay for the gloss. And I love the idea of it being Oxfam totally, but with all the bells and whistles. All the,
do you get the yellow shopping bag?
You get the same packaging as if you were buying something really expensive.
You get the tissue paper, you get the glass of champagne.
Yes, absolutely. So you walk out having had that experience. And it's really fun. And the other thing is, I was there the other day. I've had some, I'm not going to take up this full hour, but I had a brilliant, someone came up to me. There were these groups and they were taking photos and writing stuff down. And I went over and, hi, thanks for coming. And she looked quite kind of serious at me. She said, it's so nice for us because usually we can't come to this space like this because we can't spend any money because we can't afford it. And we can afford it and we love it. And that was so nice. It felt really, getting all sorts of people coming who can buy stuff, and they do. It's been very successful so far.
I think it's very interesting because there are a lot of people that wear fashion for the label, and the label is what makes them feel good about themselves. But I think there are a lot of people now who feel that by wearing something, I think a lot of fashion is about trying to make people feel good about themselves. I mean, that's a big reason why people do it. And I think I started asking this question I do a lot of talks at universities, and I started asking the question about 2 years ago, who thinks they are wearing the oldest thing? And so they had to bid. I'm wearing some trousers that are 30 years old. I'm wearing I'm wearing a hat that was my grandmother's from 1946 or whatever. But there's a real pride that people take now in wearing something that's had a very long life. And I think that's a really dramatic shift in our enjoyment of wearing clothes. You're nodding, Arizona. What do you think about the change in people's attitude and how people get their enjoyment out of clothing today?
Personally, I feel very much along the lines of what you were saying. I get very proud when I've got something secondhand on, and I created a little challenge for myself so that every day I get dressed, I'm more aware of what I'm wearing. And it's called #awareness, spelled aware like WEAR-ness. And
good pun.
I rank my outfit, and the instructions are there on my Instagram account. And you rank your outfit. So say I'm wearing a hat, a jacket, a top, trousers, and shoes. That means I have 5 pieces on. And if one of them's secondhand, one of them's organic cotton, one of them's new and nothing special, and one of them is my grandmother's hat, and the other one is a vegetable tanned shoe. That means I get 4 out of 5 because 4 of the things were sustainable and one of them wasn't. And it's not about winning. Some days I get only 1 out of 5, or some days I get 4 out of 4. And it's just amazing how I am so much more aware as I get dressed every morning now. I'm like, I really make a huge effort to use all my sustainable pieces, and also to really, it has even more so prevented me from buying things that are not sustainable because it's not useful in my game.
That's very weird that you should say that, because about 18 months ago, maybe 2 years ago, I came up with an idea for an app where all of our clothes would have a tag, and every time we wore them, the more we wore them, the more valuable they would become in the app, like a little game, exactly as you described. And the more sustainable they were, the more value they had at the beginning. And if you bought something new, it was a bit like snakes and ladders. You buy something new, you kind of slip down a snake, but you kind of wear it 500 times and you climb up a ladder. And, essentially my mum would win this game every single time because everything she wears is 500 years old at least. But it feels right. It feels like that is the way we ought to be. I love fashion, and I want to indulge in little bits of it. There are things that I want, I want just a little bit of something, but it has to be something that's really special and really rare. And it takes me back to when I was a kid, and I just wanted, I would save for 6 months for one little thing, and it would bring me great joy. And I still have a lot of those pieces of clothing 35 years later, and I still love wearing them, just as you do. And also, I think, bits of clothing that have special meaning to us. You talk about your grandmother's hat. Like, I have bits of clothing that were my dad's, that were my grandfather's. I have mittens that my granny knitted me. Those are the things that are really special to me. And I think we went so far down the consumption kind of tunnel that we lost sight of what it was that made clothes special for us. You're both nodding at the bottom. Dear, tell us a little bit about your relationship with clothes that have had a long life. Also, I think it's respectful to the person that makes them that we keep them for a long time.
I think if you find something that you've purchased because it was made based on quality over quantity, and it's something that is a bit more original than you would find, at a value or a fast fashion brand. I think anything that's made in a quality way, you're going to have for a long time. Obviously, trends come and go. It depends on who you are as a person. I'm quite. I wear the same thing all the time. I'm not. I wouldn't say I'm a fashion diva or something like that. But I think where I'm more turned on by people who are making things from waste that look dope. We work with brands like Alawalia Studios, or I like anyone who's making things from waste, not looking from farm to factory. Those are the things that I really enjoy.
Yeah, we did a project a couple of years ago. Well, no, actually, it was last winter, and one of my customers at Norton and Sons runs a big clothing recycling business in the UK, and he and I were talking about the huge amount of very wearable clothing that he gets through his recycling centres. And so I asked him to send us a couple of sacks of white cotton shirts and cotton denim jeans, and we disassembled them, and we made them back into large pieces of usable fabric. We kept, all the seams were in weird places, but we made new garments out of reassembled fabric. And it was such a simple, nice idea. And it kind of looked great because you could see the history. Weirdly, it was something we do on the Great British Sewing Bee every year. I started a week called Reduce, Reuse, Recycle, and we just give them a load of old stuff and they have to disassemble it and make something new. And I'm with you. I think I follow a brand called Cloth Surgeon. I don't know him, but I love the things that he makes are incredibly beautiful, and all, loads of stuff out of bandanas at the moment, which I think is great. But Caroline, you've been at the shows. It is London Fashion Week is it today still happening? Yeah, you were in a show this morning.
In fact, I was in it for Day 4 London Fashion Week.
Tell me about how London Fashion Week feels. I mean, obviously, it is a particularly unusual time because of COVID, but also, is COVID having a positive impact on the way fashion presents itself? What is happening that is innovative, that is good?
You know, so we're speaking today, 4th day London Fashion Week, and in the 18 years of attending shows as a fashion editor, you know, this is a whole new world. And absolutely, I think for all the damage and the terrifying sort of business ramifications that COVID has, there has been real positive change in the way that designers are really having to kind of distill their vision into kind of what their DNA really truly means. And I think collections are actually becoming smaller, much tighter, which is great, I think, because it means, you know, smaller collections mean less things wasted, created, going on sale. And, you know, I did mention that this morning I was on a field 40 minutes outside of London for a young menswear designer, Priya Farzaneh, who's just launched women's wear. And this was like an incredible experience with fireworks and, you know, 50 people in attendance who'd made the trek out. And I think fashion and brands are really having to not only define themselves better and make less, but also I think create like much tight-knit community who are demanding of them, as well as Dio is saying, like much more responsible sourcing, less waste, reinventing, taking old things. And I think actually, you know, brands like Bethany Williams and Phoebe English here in London, or Marine Serre in Paris, who are reinventing kind of things that already exist and making luxury clothes out of what has already had life. And so I think what Bay is doing with sort of secondhand, alongside kind of what a lot of great young designers, especially here in London, are doing around reinventing what has already been loved into beautiful new things, that for me is really exciting. And we're seeing a lot more during London Fashion Week of that.
I had to go through this in June because we did our eTalks menswear show in June. I guess we were still in lockdown. I can't remember the dates. But what was amazing was that, you know, we were all able to produce something without producing anything really. Almost, we didn't do anything physical. We created the whole thing. Literally, not a single piece of fabric was flown across the globe. No, you know, nobody had to travel to watch it. Bay, you were saying earlier, you know, there's a weight that there has been a growing trend towards wastefulness in the shows, and I think that was getting out of control possibly, and this has been a very obvious check.
Yeah, you ask. Yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, exactly. Just even in terms of kind of the cars. You know, just all these cars going all across London, going all across Paris, you know, flights to New York, you know, even, and it was kind of like, you know, for cruise and pre-fall, you know, someone would want to do a show in la 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 la, I don't know, because that was the inspiration. So then 30 people would be flown to that show across the world, you know, and that just feels, you know, no one's saying it's not fabulous and alluring and glamorous. That's for sure. I'm not denigrating that at all. But it feels out of touch. It feels like a very different time from that kind of.
I'd like to add to that it is glamorous and amazing and fun to do it once, but when each editor has to do it for a month, every single day, it's not fun anymore. So you're not even enjoying what should feel really luxurious and amazing and beautiful. Everyone's in a bad mood because it's too much and they can't actually.
Caroline's never in a bad mood.
Try not to be, but it's true. It does get to be a little bit. So it's been a revelation. This, you know,
I think there was a level of wastefulness that was creeping in.
I wasn't saying editors are in a bad mood. Models get in a bad mood.
Models, okay.
I speak for myself.
So do editors. Don't worry.
But I think we'd got to a point where shows were less about the clothes and more about creating an Instagrammable moment for the people that were attending. And we had brands who were supposedly sustainable. I mean, I hate to pick on this. I'm not going to say who this person is, but filling a museum up with plastic balls. I mean, like you has your head fallen off. I mean, there's just silly, wasteful nonsense that has nothing to do with the clothes and people's enjoyment of them. And and I think when we started Community Clothing, we had a very the idea was really simple. We make stuff in really good factories. We pay people really well. We use really good materials, and we don't do anything else. There is no marketing. There's no PR. There's no shows. There's no nothing, because we want all the money to go to the people. We want to reestablish that connection between the user and the producer in a way that feels honest. And I think what was interesting, Dia, talk to me about how you see the change in split. The project you described to me very briefly before, where brands and factories were almost becoming co-owners in a production system, feels to me like the right move, because we started there, and then we got to a point very recently where fashion brands and production were completely separated. And there was no link between the value of the product and the value that the producer received. And I think that has to change.
Well, I mean, it all starts from the idea of capitalism and offshoring production to Far East. If you talk about bringing two partners together, I often hear from, let's say, our brand clients, they always talk about our supply chain partners. When I hear the word partner, I think, oh, wow, you're paying the supply chain some of your profits? No, that's not actually the case. I think during COVID times, we saw a lot of the manufacturers being left in the dark, cancellation of orders. A lot of one of my clients from the supply chain had to stop. They were left with a £600,000 order that wasn't filled, and that cripples a supplier. So if what we're trying to do with the supply chain is bring it back to where it was, make the supply chain great again. And what we basically are trying to do is ensure that if you are a partner with any of our supply chain partners or our clients, you are partners with them and you share in your revenue. We look at brands. I mean, we work with LVMH, we work with a lot of big and interesting brands, but they are blueprint holders. They pass on that blueprint to craftsmen, and those craftsmen are the supply chain. And the supply chain, they're paid and then they're dismissed. But in fact, without that supply chain, you don't have a product. So we're basically creating, let's say, this project we have with specific brands to partner with their supply chains and share in revenue, invest in those supply chains, bring resources to those supply chains. It's a weird thing when you go to one of our factories and people are creating garments that they can't even afford to buy themselves. That's weird to me. That should be a telltale sign that that company is taking advantage of something that, it's a sort of gray area. And it really comes down to, doing the right things and inequality gaps and trying to narrow them.
I think one of the things sorry, go on, Caroline.
Well, I was just going to say, I think that's so incredible. And I think the flip side of that is trying to figure out how to empower us as customers to demand our brands to partner better with their workers and their makers. And that's, one of the things that I think is as equally important as keeping the brands to task and making sure that they're treating those who make the clothes. But also us as customers have to demand more transparency, I think. And I think also just, have to start making, our wallets are our power, making those buying decisions that will in fact help the entire infrastructure of our system to get better. So there's a customer, aspect to this where we all have to demand more from our brands as well.
I think that's true, but I think
what we have the point that I was going to make. Yeah. I think we again, when we when we set up community clothing, one of the things we were very clear about doing was being completely honest about the cost base and completely transparent about where everything is made and who gets paid what. Have we got a? Is that your dog joining us there, dear? Or is it a cat's tail? It's a dog.
Tail.
Hi. You know, and I think it's one of the things that our customers really like about community clothing is that they can see exactly where the money is going, and it is possible to be that transparent. You know, we could all be that transparent, but the problem is most brands are really greedy and they do not want to show you how little the people that are making things get paid and how big their share of that pie is. I mean, I look at some product. I mean, there was a sock by a particularly popular French brand, and I worked out, I think, that the markup or the cost of the production of that sock was something like 0.3% of the selling price, and it was just, you know, sort of mind-boggling markups. And they sold out because this brand was so hot it couldn't, you know, it was just minting money. But the tools exist today to allow brands to be completely transparent. I mean, for those brands that are constantly moving, seeking cheaper factories, it's quite difficult. But I think for most brands with a stable supply chain, they could be very honest about that. Are they going to do that?
There are some really great graphs and visuals on the Fashion Revolution website about the proportion of where the profits are, where the make price is. It's really helpful to just visualize it. I think they've put it in a t-shirt outline so you really get it, like who's making money on this and who really is suffering from it. Go ahead, dear.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. I mean, we work with a lot of retailers, and all the retailers that we work with know that I don't believe in competition. So me showing up here at Selfridges is not a big deal for them. But you're talking about, you know, 2.5 on a minimum that they look from a profit margin. I mean, and that being said, you know, what is actually what's sold and how much it's sold for is totally up to the brand and the retailer. You know, it's not if they decide to say, you know, we want to pay a little bit extra to the factory workers because we realize they're not paid a living wage. That's 100% up to them. Patagonia does that when they work into a factory that isn't paying what they believe they should be paying their workers. But the biggest challenge is that we're involved in capitalism. I mean, I think it would be remiss not to mention that capitalism requires inequality. And inequality is essentially causing us to chase money. So, you know, when you're a bigger business and you're inflating your prices to cover, let's say, costs. But, you know, if the average worker is paid $95 a month and the CEO is paid, you know, $1 million or more, where's the balance? I think, you know, we can talk about the price of clothing, but it really goes back to, you know, the decisions from brands and retailers.
And you know, we work a little bit with B Corp, and one of the things that B Corp has in their structure is, you know, the guy at the top and the guy at the bottom. I can't remember what the difference is, but there's a limit to how much more the guy at the top can be paid than the guy at the bottom. But that doesn't include the manufacturers if you outsource your manufacturing, and that probably needs to be brought in. But you know, I don't believe that per se capitalism is necessarily evil, because the owners of businesses can choose to be good and can choose to be more generous. I mean, the problem is most owners and a lot of the businesses in fashion are publicly owned, so they are only after one thing, and that one thing is money, profit, ever-growing top line, ever-growing bottom line. There are owners. I mean, I own a business. I don't think I'm evil. I think I like to do the right thing. You know, I have borrowed money from some people to do what I'm doing. I don't think per se capitalism is evil, but there's a lot of bad capitalism out there. And the problem is, fashion used to be a little thing that, you know, that was all about craft. It was all about creativity. It was very much close to the border between, you know, there was a close association between art and fashion. You know, designers were genuine creatives. Fashion was small. people that made fashion, the clothes were beautifully made out of amazing materials. That shifted so far to what we call fashion today, that includes some of the biggest businesses on earth that are only in it for the money. And that's the big problem. We also talk about materials. There are some materials that get a lot of bad press. Cotton gets bad press. Cotton is a natural material. If we would just only use a small amount of it, it would be fine. The problem is we want so much of it. Consumption, I think, is the thing that drives so much of the badness in our industry. I mean, if there is an argument that fast fashion made fashion democratic, but then but Bay is making fashion democratic by selling secondhand clothing. What do we feel about where consumption is heading, and what do we feel we need to change about it? Arizona. Consumption.
Since you called on me, I have to go back to economics, because I have a more radical view on capitalism than you do, which I'd love to talk about. I think I would dare to say that the businessmen who have good intentions, such as yourself, would function exceptionally well in a different sort of economic system other than capitalism. I would say you would really enjoy yourself, actually. Whereas the people who we're terming the businessmen with bad intentions would be unable to have those bad intentions in a different economic system. And I would recommend further reading on that topic. Sacred Economics by Charles Eisenstein. Pretty spectacular book. Love him. It blew my mind. It blew my mind, and it completely changed the way I think about the world. And and I loved it. I loved that. Whoa. And I was already... Well, it's called Sacred Economics. It's a long book. I listened to it as an audiobook because I have 2 young children and I don't have the time to sit down and read, but I do have the time to listen while I walk or cook. And I enjoyed every single word of that book. It talks about the gift economy, but not in the way I was expecting from what the gift economy is called. It's not just about giving everybody everything and just generosity at all costs. Not at all. It's quite a complex economy, and it's an actual economy that is described within the book. And it talks about a lot of things. It sounds like you've read the book. Do you have anything to add about what is in there?
What's the big idea? Can we crystallize the big idea of this version of an economic system versus capitalism?
I would look at it another way. I would say, consider where we are right now. Everyone who has money has the ability to influence politics, influence the decision-making of countries because of GDP. As I said, I work with some large organizations, let's say French organizations, that add very greatly to the GDP of France. That's a capitalist situation that a small percentage of the society are at the top, everyone else is at the bottom, with very little say-so. So if you want to put all your trusts in people at the top to do the right thing and cross your fingers, then look at America right now. Look at Mr. Trump.
We've been working on capitalism for 40 years. We've been trying to make it good for 40 years. And we have 40 years of proof that this is not working. People are not happy.
I mean, I agree with you. I think so many of the problems that we face as a society are due to inequality, and I think they are due to I did a TED talk a couple of years ago, and it was about the textile industry, and it was the sort of genesis of community clothing. And we talked about the disappearance of jobs in places like Blackburn, where we have a factory, and all of the textile production towns, mostly in Lancashire and Yorkshire. Something like 1.5 million jobs disappeared over a period of about 50 years as we outsourced things, and we didn't replace those jobs with anything good. So that's it's a huge number of people that have no great purpose in their life. And, the manufacturing industry gave people pride, it gave them personal respect, it gave an identity to the towns where they came from. And if we, we're not going to go back to 1.5 million jobs because technology has moved on. But it's perfectly possible to create a system if you think, if you think about the model differently, that allows people to have good jobs all the way through that fashion system. Not just money at the top and nothing at the bottom. And I think if we do that, we start to solve so many more problems in our society that, frankly, we're all suffering from. I think Brexit is a result of disenfranchised, individuals who've lost a sense of, the value of their lives, and they're pissed off. And if everybody had a good job to go to and had an income level that didn't feel, minimal, then people would be much happier. I mean, maybe I'm just a bit optimistic, but I think it's certainly true. I mean, the fashion industry does have the potential to be a force for good. I think the clothing industry has the potential to be a force for good, but it has to be reimagined, which is kind of what the question we're supposed to be answering today is: how do we reimagine this system in a way that makes fashion, firstly, something that is good for the 21st century, and how do we get there? Does anybody, who wants to start? Because that's the kind of big burning question. I'm going to pick on Bay because she's in the top right hand corner, and that's that.
I mean, I suppose. From maybe, sort of slightly going back to what Arizona was saying, I think that things have to be broken down. And I think the thing that really has to happen, I don't know how it happens. I mean, I could talk about secondhand clothes. Of course, we should buy secondhand clothes. I'm wearing a T-shirt on an old T-shirt that Fergadelic, who did the Palace Triangle, and what Caroline, you were saying, reinventing cool stuff on clothes that have existed before. All of that, I completely think is incredibly powerful, and I believe in, and I've always believed in the power of secondhand clothes. But I think that where we are in terms of fashion, in terms of we're a terrifying place in terms of the environment, in terms of climate change. And it's so unbelievable that nothing's really happening to change it. And I think that it is about system, it's about profound change, and it's about the nature and the planet maybe being more important than people needing to have all this money, where priorities are different, and the people in power who have the money, that isn't the priority every single time. And until, I know I'm saying it very simply because I don't know the answer, and I haven't intellectualized this. I haven't really read. I just know about it in the same way that we kind of all do. But it just seems to me that, when is it going to shift, where the thing that needs to be important is the most important thing? I find it mind-boggling. Every report I read about the climate, you read it and nothing's being done. It's absolutely extraordinary. So I think it has to come on something that I really believe in on a really practical level, homing down to fashion. Buy secondhand. Buy secondhand. And if you go into a charity shop, you do it that way. Not only are you buying something that's existed before, but you're also giving money to the poorest, to exactly that thing of inequality. You're giving money to the poorest people in the world. I mean, Oxfam, whether it's Save the Children, whether it's cancer care, or what you name your charity shop. I work with Oxfam, and I love the fact that any work that I do with them is basically about going ultimately to help the poorest people in the world, overcome poverty and suffering, and the inequality that exists. Anyway, I'm really sorry if that was just like, what? I don't know the answer.
Well, it's an answer. It's part of the answer. Absolutely. Have you read the Earth Logic Plan, Bay?
No, but I'll write it down. I've got my pen. Yeah.
But yeah,
Right.
anyone who hasn't read the Earth Logic Plan, I would encourage you to do it, because it talks about all
and
of
what's
this.
that? What's that? Give us a synopsis. What is that?
Oh
Patrick?
gosh. Well, effectively, it says a number of things. It says that we need to bring everything back locally, and they're not the only people to say that. I mean, Fibershed is another great example of people who believe that and again, community clothing was around the idea that you keep it local, then all the money flows locally and stays in a much smaller economic area and is more generously distributed. Earth Logic talks about the need to repurpose clothing. It talks about repair. It wants to bring repairing clothes back in, because by creating jobs repairing clothes, those are very skilled jobs. They're well paid. It talks about valuing clothing for a much longer period. I mean, it's a nice way. It talks about putting the earth first. It's exactly what Arizona said. It says, planetary health is important. I mean, I don't know if we all watched David Attenborough's Extinction show last Sunday night. Again, another reminder that we are really screwing this up. We've got one planet. The level of extinction is just, it's heartbreaking. And, we as a fashion industry are contributing to that. So I think starting with secondhand is as good a part of the solution as we
I will say this.
imagine.
Thank you, but secondhand is really the only sustainable way, because even if you're buying sustainable clothes, that T-shirt is still being produced, the dye is still being set, and and I'm just saying, so secondhand is really powerful. You're not buying anything.
I think just keeping things for longer is an even simpler thing. Just don't. I mean, sorry, I'm going to go to Caroline next. If we each do one big thing, Caroline, then we'll have 4 at the end. Caroline, what's yours? It doesn't have to be as good as buy secondhand.
Well, I think it's, everybody says this, but it's buy less, but buy better. Think about, what it means to buy a 10-pack of T-shirts for £5. What does that mean down the chain? It doesn't mean anything good. Buy less, buy better, save up, and create future vintage that then generations later will be able to sell for secondhand clothes after. And I also would love to see, and I think socially responsible businesses in fashion, we love fashion. This is, we get up, we get dressed every morning, and everybody is touched by fashion. And we still crave beautiful, well-crafted things. And I think on the luxury end, a brand like Gabriella Hearst to Bethany Williams, socially responsible businesses that can create an ecosystem where everybody is winning and making beautiful things is a wonderful thing. So yes, buy less, but buy better.
Dear.
So for me, it's no more farm to factory. No more using anything other than what's physically already here. There's enough to upcycle, recycle. There's brands like, I think Bethany Williams was mentioned, Priya Ahluwalia, Duran Lantnik, 424, Mariah Essa, and Kuta Sarka. There's retail rental markets or options like Pool Berlin. There's a lot of things. Of course, vintage is great, or reusing anything that's physically already here. We don't need to create new fabric or new materials from virgin anymore. It's ridiculous. So for me, my champions are those who make dope fashion from existing materials. I think that should be something that we all should push design houses to do. It's quite easy for anyone to spend loads of money, $70 a yard or $100 a yard or whatever, if you have a big budget to make beautiful things. But, how does that solve a problem? 2 days ago, a friend of mine, Runa from Pool Berlin, called me and asked me if I knew any way to get rid of 103,000 polyester shirts that are sitting in the Denmark haven. And, no, I don't have a way. And I think the other side is for brands and those who source materials to understand what polyester does. There are companies in existence who take, oceans plastics and put them into soft goods. Stop doing that. I mean, that's basically a conundrum. It just makes no sense. It's basically is creating, microplastics going right back into the ocean and polluting it. Using, recycled plastics for hard goods is a possible solution. But be educated on when you're getting involved in this plight to save the world. Be knowledgeable. Figure out, if you're advising someone to do something, make sure you're advising him in a way that's not going to harm the planet even further. So there's a lot of solutions. There's a lot of brands who are doing things the right way. That's what I would say.
Arizona.
I spend a lot of time thinking about the future. I love it. I just love to daydream about a good future in which the planet we are not exceeding the boundaries of this planet on a constant, incessant level without giving anything back. The Earth is just desperate for us just to sit down for a minute and connect with the Earth and say, first of all, we are so sorry that we've been this rude and disrespectful to the planet that we live on. Now we're going to be different. We're going to behave differently, and we're actually going to show love toward the planet rather than treat it like it's some kind of commodity and providing So where I'm going with this is regenerative agriculture. Most of fashion is grown, and regenerative agriculture holds a huge space in the future, in the good future, because soil is degraded more than it ever has been before. And soil should be filled with billions and trillions of microorganisms, some of them not so micro, like worms or grubs, all the way to fungi, and then the little things that we'll never be able to see, but we need them there. They all feed on each other. It's a nice, happy, biodiverse ecosystem, and they also pass nutrients back and forth to the plants whose roots are in the soil. This is a process that we absolutely have to nurture. And as fashion brands, we can start doing that by sourcing materials that are from regenerative agriculture. This will include animals. It will include cows. Cows are the most regenerative beings there are. They produce constantly a steady stream of food for soil, which is called manure. It's amazing. They even will distribute it evenly across the place that they're given to distribute it. I mean, it's so beautiful the way they work. So that's one whole thing. Regenerative agriculture, love the earth. Second thing is creativity. Creativity is not spoken about enough on the sustainable fashion platform at the moment. I think we're getting there, but we need to redistribute the creativity. It's not fair. Creativity is sitting right at the top of the supply chain with one designer or one very small design team who have an amazing job and who are, yes, they're under the time pressure of fashion, and that I do think we need to change as well, the fear culture and the time pressure that this industry places on the shoulders of the people who work in it. But creativity is something that we can share and distribute further along down the supply chain to give meaningful work to the humans who make our clothes. Because making clothes should be something that is fun. It should be something that can be done together as a family. Should be something that provides work for whole families so they don't have to separate and segregate during the day, because there are horrible situations where children are essentially homeless during the day for 12 hours, 13 hours, because their parents work in factories. That's not okay with me. That's not okay that I know this and that these clothes are still being produced like this. We need to distribute creativity more fairly and appreciate that all humans deserve to have a creative career.
Very good. Thank you, all of you. There are, all of those fantastic points. Now, I have been receiving some questions from our live audience. Gosh, quite a few. Right, I'm going to start at the top. When all business is driven by growth, how does the fashion industry maintain its size when the solution is about producing less? Now, does anybody think that the fashion industry needs to maintain its size?
No, growth is overrated.
I mean, I'd be happy if every fashion brand was absolutely tiny. I don't think, does anybody on this panel agree that the fashion industry is the right size?
No.
Does anybody think it should be bigger?
No.
I mean, but there is a point. There is a point to make. I mean, there is. I heard a statistic. A researcher at Royal Holloway told me that there was enough clothing on the planet today to clothe the next six generations of the human race, even accounting for, like, there's enough clothing. It's what we do with the stuff that we've got. So it really boils down to also, but let's not forget that the clothing industry creates good employment for a lot of people, but they don't have to be making necessarily new stuff. But it's how do we, what do we all think it should be smaller? I mean, I think we all agree that consumers could do with a lot less clothing.
Yeah, there's what we said earlier, touched upon. I mean, there are so many collections, I mean, how many collections are there a year? I mean, it used to be, I feel like it's spring and autumn, winter. And now, there's 5 or 6, maybe 8 or 9. I mean, I'm not sure, but it's that thing of, pre-fall and fall and cruise. And it's just crazy because that's what can be sold.
I would love to see new businesses. I think there are new businesses that can come out of this, not in terms of growth, but kind of using what we have. So I would love to see now all the sadly empty shops in all of our local communities, like repair shops. I'm obsessed with the show on the BBC, The Repair Shop. And I think it would be great if even in the fashion education system, that actually foundation courses, were taught more or less about using new, but actually repairing, doing the Marine Serre or the Bethany Williams way of kind of using what exists and creating beautiful things. And why couldn't I bring a whole bag of things and saying, make me something new with all this stuff, or repair my 20-year-old jeans that are now completely, cracking at the seams. I would love to see new businesses that are sort of pivoting towards how do we still create beautiful things in fashion, but using what we have already. So I think there's, and I think there are new ways of looking at this that will create kind of redistribution of the size and skill set of this industry.
I have a question that's related, and of course, I do a show on the BBC that's all about sewing, and we now get 6 million people watching a show in which people make their own clothes and alter old things into new things, and it's been brilliant. I mean, it's been amazing to be part of that show and to be part of a growing, trend for people knowing how to make and repair things. But I have a question here. It says, I sew virtually all my own clothes, jeans, coats, tops, etc., and I know how long it takes to create something. Do you think people have no concept of the time involved in creating a garment, therefore think it's acceptable to pay as little as possible for clothes? I mean, personally, I think the answer is people have I think it is people's awareness of how long it takes to make something is growing. But I don't think it is clear enough that people understand the value. We do not value those people who make our clothes nearly enough. Dia, what do you think about people's understanding of what goes into making their clothes?
I mean, I don't think that consumers really care. I think at the end of the day, it's a privilege to actually have a choice to choose to buy something that's responsible, or to think about, the time and effort that goes into it. Most people are wearing clothes because they don't want to be naked. We're talking about fashion, and the type of fashion we're talking about are those who are running up and down the runway. But, if you think about outside of the Western world, most people are buying what they can afford. So no, they don't think about the time that it takes, because look, we don't think past our nose for many things. So, I wouldn't say that, it's something that's a thought. I think, however, looking at climate change, looking at the COVID crisis, looking at all the things that are changing the way that we're living today. I mean, my business is growing by leaps and bounds this year just because of, all the issues that come up from climate change. So maybe that brings a bit more awareness. But I think, honestly, no one thinks about the food industry, really. I mean, you don't go to a a restaurant and think, oh my God, the time that it took to make this meal, you think, oh, how great this meal is or how delicious it is. The same thing when you go to a thrift shop or you go anywhere to purchase something, you think how beautiful something is. Now, if you see something very intricate and ornate and looks like a lot of time has gone into it, maybe your thought is, wow, that must have taken a lot of time. But as a whole, if I go and buy, or if someone goes and buys a T-shirt or a pair of jeans, I don't think they're thinking about the from fiber to delivery, the time and effort that went into going to make that, to be honest.
Well, the Environmental Audit Committee, which created a set of, I think, 18 points that were given to the British government around sustainability in fashion last year, I think. One of the points, all of them were ignored, by the way. None of the 18 points were adopted as policy. One of the policy suggestions was that we taught people how to sew in schools again, so that they can understand what cotton is, what wool is. I mean, I do a show. Joe Lysett, who is a fantastically educated man, 2 years ago on the first series of Sewing Bee, asked me the question, what is polyester? Now, it sounds ludicrous, but if nobody has ever explained to you what cotton is, what wool is, what polyester is, then how can you make an informed choice? It's the same with food and nutrition. If you don't know what's in your food, how can you make a smart choice about it? And the other thing was, of course, if we know how to make things, we know how to repair things. And my view, I mean, we did a project last year with Celia Pym, who's a darner. We did lots of darned patches. We did lots of clothes on our runway that were repaired. They were repaired very beautifully. They had beautiful ornate darnings and patchings. So we sent them down the catwalk they were already repaired. And the point we were trying to make was, the more you repair something, the more you have a connection with it, and the more beautiful it becomes to you. So I think we are moving in the right direction with regards to repairing stuff and valuing clothes, but we're at the beginning of it. Right, I think we have time for probably one more question. COVID-19 forced a change. However, how much of this change will be maintained long term? Fashion shows are about C and BC. It's about glamour, gossip, etc. How will that be substituted? How about all the jobs that are associated with fashion shows? What will be the impact on the city's economies, etc.? Now, I think the first thing to say is most fashion shows exist and happen in very rich cities where the economies are doing pretty well. London, New York, Paris, Tokyo. We're not talking about places that are struggling economically. But does anybody think, of course there will be an impact. There will be an impact on set designers, on makeup artists, on hairstylists, on models. But can we see people going back to big fashion shows again? I mean, I suspect we probably will. But what do we think about the long-term future of fashion shows? What would we like to see happen there? Because I think we all agree that doing without them is definitely a lot less wasteful. And, if all the money we spent on shows, a good friend of mine told me how much there was a show by a very big famous French brand, and it cost 15 million euros for one show. It lasted 25 minutes. I mean, that money could all have gone to the people that make the clothes, and the world would have been a better place. Now, what do we think about the future of big fashion shows like this? Very quickly. Somebody got it. Who wants to grab this one? Caroline.
Well, I'll quickly just say that having now spent 4 days without many fashion shows, there is absolute value in a fashion show, but they do not have to be necessarily at the scale that they have been in the past. I think there is absolute value in experience, communal experience, and seeing the clothes, but it has to be reimagined. And as we're talking about, in new ways, presentations, smaller salons, something. I hope we don't go back to the same way, and I don't think we will. That time is gone. We're going to be going on to something new, but I think there is value still in some sort of fashion presentation.
Right. Sadly, we are out of time. My apologies to those people who have sent in fantastic questions which we have not had time to answer. I apologize. I'm going to very, very quickly just sum up a few of the things that we've decided here, because we did want to answer the question: how do we recreate a better fashion industry? At least I think that was roughly the question. First thing, we can buy secondhand, but also we can value the things that we own and keep things for longer and repair them. We can create, we can buy fewer things and buy better things, and we can take care to buy things from brands where everyone is winning. I love that expression, Caroline. We can end the use of virgin materials. There's enough stuff on the planet, and we can instead replace all of that virgin production with a creative industry that values individuals who will make us things from things that already exist. And we can think about the planet first. We can think soil to soil, like people like FiberShed and Earth Logic. We can think about how we create a clothing system that works for everybody, not just a few people. And I think if we can do that, we'll be doing the world and the fashion system a very great service. So I want to say thank you very much to my 4 very esteemed panelists. It has been a fascinating conversation. Thank you. Thank you to everybody who is watching and has sent in questions. I hope you've enjoyed it. I would encourage you to nip down to Selfridges and either shop at Oxfam or buy some lovely community clothing. You can feel proud to do both of those things. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thanks so much.
Bye.